Welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. I'm Stephanie Semming. Today we are going to be making the September 2017 block of the month for the Stars in the Night quilt. Today we're making some little blocks, but there are quite a few of them to make, but they go quick. We're going to be using paper piecing, so you're going to want to pick up some Carol Doak paper for paper piecing. It's officially called Carol Doak foundation paper. I'll have a link to where you can get this along with the video tutorial over at quiltaddictsanonymous.com, so make sure you click on the link in the video if you're watching this on YouTube so you can find out where you can get this. You need it because it kind of has the consistency of newsprint, so you're able to get your needle through that pretty easily, and it perforates it and makes it easy to tear away. Let's get started. Along with your free printable instructions is going to come this printed diagram. There's going to be 4 blocks will fit on each page, and you'll notice there's a box here that should measure 1 inch. You're going to want to print this at 100%, and then it should measure 1 inch. But just to be sure, make sure you lay your ruler over it and make sure that it fully covers the 1 inch block with the 1 inch square on your ruler. This does, so we're ready to go. So what you can do is you can cut out these blocks, and you want to cut in between the dotted lines because the dotted lines are your seam allowances. So we definitely want to keep that fully intact, or it's going to be difficult to sew this together properly in the end. So I am just kind of lining my ruler, I'm just kind of lining my ruler up in between and then slicing with my rotary cutter. So now I have 1 cut out, and we can see that we're well outside that dotted line. Now, we've done a little bit of paper piecing before in this pattern, but if you're just finding it now, what we do is we kind of sew by number. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to flip this over. And for this pattern, we are going to be putting the square on the back. And actually, to make this a little easier, I'm also going to cut, and you may want to do this at home too, I'm going to trim the outside edges here so that they are about the same width. I'm giving myself about 1/8 of an inch on the outside of all these dotted lines, because since this block is a square, it's just going to make it a lot easier to see where everything is supposed to go. So what you want to do here is lay this on the wrong side. So I have my printed side is now facing down, and I'm laying my center block over the wrong side of that. And you kind of almost want to hold it up to the light, and when you do that, you're going to be able to see that there's a shadow around where this block is. Kind of can maybe see it on the overhead camera. You can see that here's my line, and then you can see a darkness where that fabric is. And you want this to extend well beyond that line because you want your seam allowance to be in there. So once I'm confident that I have this in the right spot, I'm going to put a pin parallel to number 2, because this piece is number 1 that we just pinned on, and number 2 is going to go on next. And then for this one, I also am going to put a pin on this side, so that way this block stays nice and square as I'm sewing it together. So I'm going to flip that over, and I'm going to grab one of the triangle pieces, and I'm going to lay that down. And these are cut fairly generously. There's a lot of waste in paper piecing, but you're able to get really accurate points without having to cut very nicely. So if I flip this over, I can see that I'm well beyond where I need to be for that seam allowance. So that's a good way to test and audition that. So I'm just going to go ahead and line this up with the edge of that square. And you could pin this, I don't. But I'm going to go ahead and flip that over and keep it pinched together and bring it to my sewing machine. Now, if your sewing machine has it, you may want to switch to an open-toed applique foot that allows you to see the line that we're going to be sewing on really easily, and then we're able to just stitch right down there. So when you do paper piecing, there's a couple of things you want to do to your machine. First, you want to reduce your stitch width to anywhere around 1.5, 1.4, 1.6. Somewhere in that range, and that perforates the paper a little easier and makes it easier to tear that out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start sewing where I see this dotted line, And then I go real slow onto that point, because the reason why we do paper piecing is because we were sewing right on that line, so you can see exactly where you're supposed to be to have all the points exactly where they need to go. So I go really slow there, and then I typically speed up when I'm on a straightaway. Because if you're a little off here, it doesn't really matter as much. And then I slow down again when I get back to that point. And then I'm going to keep on sewing until I pass that dotted line again. Alright, so we finished sewing, so I'm going to go ahead and remove these pins. We won't need them anymore. And what we need to do now is trim these seam allowances. So what I like to do is take a little postcard and put it on that seam and then fold over. And if you ordered a kit, you have got a postcard with it that you can use. Now I'm laying my 1/4 inch mark along where that fold is, right here. So now I'm basically cutting my 1/4 inch seam allowance. And if this is your first time doing this, you may have wanted to actually flip this over to make sure that it fully covers the paper, like it does here, before you do this. I've done this a lot, so I'm pretty confident that it's good to go. So now we're going to press this. Alright, so now you just want to press this like you would any other seam and get it real good and flat. Alright, so now it is time to get the next seam ready. So we need to trim, in this case, first. It's only for the first 2 pieces that you trim after. So what you want to do is just fold that over on your line, and then you kind of yank off. It's like, you know, waxing your eyebrows. You just have to yank it off, that strip. And then those seams will separate from the paper. So now I've got my 1/4 inch, again, lined up with the edge of my postcard where that seam allowance is. And the lines are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for the blocks in this, but it really doesn't matter what order you go in as long as you put that one block on first, this center block. It's like this one I'm going out of order, and that's fine, it's not a big deal. So I now have my seam allowance set. So now I can line this up exactly with this edge, and I know that my seam allowance is going to be perfect. Again, if you want, you can sort of double check. You can fold this over to make sure your center is lined up the way you want. You can pin this. I don't. What I just do is I kind of gather it up and pinch it, flip it over, and bring it to the sewing machine. So just like before, all I do here is sew slowly until I hit that point. Speed up a little bit on the straightaway, and then slow down again when I get to that point, and then sew all the way past that dotted line. Alright, as you can see that my seam allowance is a little skinnier here and a little fatter here. That's the beauty of paper piecing, is that it really doesn't matter. You don't have to refix the seam later or anything. You can just press that and then it'll all get trimmed up to be perfect at the end. So it really just doesn't matter at all. So here you can see the seam that I just sewed, where it looked a little funky from the other side. It looked like the seam was all crooked. But here you can see that I've sewn right on this line, and so everything is going to turn out just fine when it's all done, as long as you are sewing on that line. So from here we're just going to be repeating that process to go all the way around the block. Just line up your postcard, pull this. Oops, we don't want to pull the paper like that. If you do that, you can tape this. You have to buy special matte tape, and that you can tape that. This isn't that bad of an error, so I'm just going to let it be. So now we're going to trim this to a 1/4 inch seam, just like before. And I'm not going to tape this because this is not a bad tape. But I'll have a link to the type of tape you need if you do make an error and you don't want to start over. You just put it on there and it's heat resistant and it works great. So I'm just grabbing another triangle. I would just put that on there and then sew, and then you just can keep repeating the process until you go all the way around the block. Alright, so I have finished sewing all my triangles around my center block, and it's looking a little weird right now. This is not a very attractive block. It's not one that is anywhere near square. So we have one last step before this block is done. So you're going to line your 1/4 inch mark up on that solid line. Just like that. Flip it around. Do the same thing. And now we've cut on all those dotted lines, and when we flip it over, we have a beautiful little square that is going to finish with these points perfectly when we sew these together. So this is it. This is our tiny little block for September. There are 32 to make. They go around to frame the block that we made last month in August. They're really cute and they're really fast. So just make sure you go to quiltaddictsanonymous.com and click on the Block of the Month tab, and make sure you go to September to get your free pattern to go with this so that you have your foundation template for that. Thanks so much for following along, and happy quilting!